Hello class, we're going to go over the Excel spreadsheet that we made in class, and we're going to use this example. So if you downloaded this, basically I'm going to recreate this for you to make sure that you can produce what's in here. So you can download this and follow along to see where things are going, or you can just try to kind of reproduce it while you're watching the video. So first thing, I'm going to put our data in here. This is already pre-sorted because I got it from the spreadsheet that I'd already made, and so it had been sorted in the last option in there. So I just want you to know that you can put it in there any fashion. So when we put it in there at the beginning of class last night, it wasn't sorted. So just to kind of give you an I don't want to. I know I've got 1, 2, 3, 250s. So I'm going to sort, like, I'm going to put this a 250, and let's see, that was an 84. So, all right, so now it's the same data set, it's just no longer sorted. So like if this had been how I presented it, one of the first things we did last night was we highlighted our data, and then we used this. Maybe raise this up a little bit so you can see. We used this sort filter button. We click that. Once we've got our data highlighted, we click that, and we can sort smallest to largest or largest to smallest. We didn't do largest to smallest last night, so I just wanted you to see that it does go from the biggest to the smallest. And then if I switch the order to smallest to largest, this is the way that we presented it last night. And typically for the things that we do in this class would be the way the default sort that I would do. All right, so there's our sort. Now we're going to, from the sort, we're going to build our min and max. I can see that's the minimum, that's the maximum. If I hadn't sorted it, it would still be the same. This series of steps would still be the same thing that I would do to find the min and max. So I like to label the cells that I have values in. So these two, min and max, I'm just going to click in those cells and drag down to highlight them. Then I'm going to come over here and change the alignment to make it right aligned. Okay. If I put the little cursor between the cells, I can change the size of a cell. I can do that to any cell that I want to. I can make it bigger or smaller by doing that, just to give a little space between it. You know, you don't want to have like all your letters and numbers and words kind of smushed up together, so it just gives me a little space between them. Now within the minimum, right beside it, the cell beside it, so I use this cell to give a label for this, but right beside it I'm going to write in the letters MIN for minimum, and you can see MIN returns the smallest number in a set of values, open parentheses, and then I'm going to click the first one and just drag down to the very bottom. And when I do that, you'll see this kind of dashed border going around here that lets you know this is what you've highlighted. So I've highlighted the 20 numbers. I just hit enter, and it finds the minimum of those numbers. If I hit MAX for max, same thing, open the parentheses, highlight your data, and hit enter. Another thing I want to show you with these lists when you're finding min and max and all the different properties of a data set that we're going to be studying, you can also type in max, and you can click the first item in a cell. And this is not a bad one because I can see the bottom from the top of the screen. I don't have to like scroll out of the screen to go from top to bottom. But if I only have 20 values, let's say if I had like 100 values, I wouldn't want to scroll down and keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling. So what you can do is, after you've highlighted the top value in a cell, or sorry, in a row or column, you can hold the shift and control key down at the same time and just press down, and notice it goes all the way down to the bottom of your data set. So again, what I did there was I'm going to delete the values in that cell. I typed in equals MAX for max, open parentheses, click the first item, hold down the shift and control keys, and then just hit the down arrow, and it highlights everything, all the non-empty values in that cell from top to bottom. Alright, and then there's my max. Alright, once I have the min and max, the next thing we did was how many number of classes that we wanted. Alright, that goes out of the cell width, so again I can drag that over, right align. We did 6 classes. You can change that to 5, 6, 7, 10. So you don't want to have an absurd amount, but you don't want it to be only like 4 classes either. Okay, and then after we have those 3, the min, the max, the number of classes, we can compute the class width. Alright, our class width is obtained by subtracting these 2 and then dividing by the number of classes. So I need to open parentheses, I need to subtract max, so I click max, minus min, click min, close your parentheses, and then divide by the number of classes. Alright, and then I hit enter. Alright, and then this is what we did in class. We said, alright, that's not a whole number, 82.333. I need to always round this up. So once you have calculated, when you calculate it, the square or the rectangle will be below that cell. You just click back into that cell and you just manually round it up by just overriding it and typing 83 in there. Your other option that we did in class, you can use the round up feature of Excel. So round up, if I click that, it says what's your number? Well, I'm actually going to give it a formula for that number instead. I'm going to give it the thing we did to get that decimal before we round it. So I'm going to do the max minus the min in a parentheses divided by the number of classes. It is going to compute that. We're still, notice it's still boldface, we're still within the number part. And then we're done with the number, we put a comma. So I'm going to put a comma after that. So there's my number. And then number of digits, this is actually number of decimal places that it's asking you for. So I don't want any decimal places, I want it to be a whole number. And it'll round up that decimal to the nearest whole number. Okay, if I, just so you can see it, if I had changed this to like 1, it's going to round it to the first decimal place. So it's 82.33, so that next number is 33, so but we're rounding up, so we'll do it 82.4. But if we want whole numbers, we want to put a 0 right there. Alright, so there's my class width, 83. Okay, now there are times, I'll give you an example, I'll put that in here too next. There are times when our data set is in tenths or hundredths, and we will need to use decimals in our calculations, and I'll give you a video on that next. Alright, once we know the class width, we're ready to start making our classes. So what I like to do is I like to give a little space between these values and when I actually start making the classes. So these are my lower limits for my classes, and then right beside it I'll put my upper limits, and those upper limits are very important. The upper limits are what Excel actually is going to use to compute these values to make our frequency distribution. Alright, so lower limits, we start with the lowest value, so our lowest number was 6, and as we move down, as we complete our frequency distribution's lower limits, we're going to add the class width all the way down. So this second cell is the thing above it, so I'll type equals, click the cell above it, plus the class width. Right? I can lock that in place by hitting F4, or if F4 doesn't work on yours, you have to manually type in those dollar signs around the C. I could also, and now it's locked in, so I can drag down. I need 6 of these. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I want 6 classes, so that's why I drug down that many times. Alright, now the other way that you could lock in a cell, or lock in the class width, is literally to type the number 83 in there. So I could do E2 plus, and then instead of clicking that and hitting F4, I could just type, since it's a whole number, I could just type that number in, and it would do the same thing. Now it's just going to add 83 all the way down, since I actually typed in what to add. So it's fine if you do that and you don't have to worry about the clicking in the F4. But if for whatever reason this changed, like again, if this had been 60, it would still be the minimum, and now that class width changed, but this didn't update with it. Okay, if I had called it C4 with the $sign and I drug it down, now if I change that to 60, everything's going to change. Okay, so anyway, it's completely up to you. If you think you've entered it incorrectly, it's fine to just manually type in your class width. It's less stuff to press and remember. It's going to be accurate, again, assuming you got everything accurate in front of it. All right, your upper limits. Remember, your upper limits are 1 unit below this. So, again, in this example, the units are ones that we're separating things by. But if they're tenths or hundredths or something like that, then we'd have to, instead of subtracting 1, we could possibly subtract a tenth or a hundredth. Again, I'll give you an example that has decimals in the next video. So this is 88. It's 1 less than this number. And then once again, if I move down, I'm going to add the class width. So I'm going to click equals this value plus the class width. I'm going to lock it in. And then I'm going to drag that down beside the 421. So these were our classes. And now that I have these upper class limits and I have the data set over here, I'm ready to have Excel build me my histogram. But I had to have this to have Excel do it for me. These are what Excel is going to refer to as the bins in the program that it uses. All right. If you clicked on data and you don't see, you don't have your data analysis kit, you need to come over to File, Options, and then I want to do Add-ins and Excel Add-ins, and I will click Go, and then I want to click on these two guys, Analysis Toolpack VBA. It'll take it a second, then once they're in there, you'll have data analysis over here. Okay, so I'm going to click on data analysis. I want to do a histogram. A histogram is, again, just the visual of the frequency distribution. All right, input range, that's your data. So my input range are these values. My bin range, this is what I was talking about, the bins, that's our upper limits here. If for some reason you want to include your labels, if you labeled this, these were distances traveled, if you wanted to label them distances and you included that, if you had that top one, distance traveled, and you included that in there, you would tell Excel that by clicking that labels, so it wouldn't it would know to ignore that first value in the column. All right, output range, I want to spit this out right here in H1. The reason I'm doing that is, again, I'm going to skip this cell because this is where my midpoints are going to go to fix the axis, because Excel does this weird thing where it puts the upper limits in the middle of the rectangles for the histogram. So anyway, I'm going to click my output range right there. Click OK. So there's my frequency distribution. Oops, let me delete that. Do it again because I want it to give me the chart. So the chart output is that actual histogram. So I'm going to click that, click OK, and then it gives me the frequency distribution. There's my chart. Now it's got this labeled frequency here. I personally always delete that. And here's what I don't like. Here's the fact that, first of all, a histogram, the bars technically should touch, especially for data like this that are distances and there's no gaps in possible distances. So the way you fix that is just double click any of these bars and it'll pop up these options, and I don't want a gap. So I'm going to do it like that. If you just made it, a tiny little gap, that's fine to like separate the bars. If you wanted to do something like that, that's fine. But you want them to be right up against one another. Okay, so you can use the bars or the gap between the bars, like a 1%, 2%, just to give a little separation in the bars, especially when we have so many that are kind of common size right here. So we can see our classes. All right, but here's what I don't like. Here's what I actually am still shocked that Excel, after all these years, still has not fixed is that these bars are the upper limits of these cells. So again, we talked about it in class, but this 88 and this 6 and 88 are the bounds for this first region. This is like a number line right here. And technically these little tick marks should correspond to these breaks in the these little tick marks should correspond to the breaks in the numbers. So this would be like a 6 here, and this should be like 88 or 89 depending on how you want to look at it. But technically you could say it's like 88 and a half, 171 and a half should be where these tick marks are. They're not. 88's not in the middle of this number line. 88's right here. 171's not in the middle. It's over here. So why I leave this blank, and you can actually go ahead and fill it in if you want to, but procedurally we need this in Excel to get the histogram made and the frequency distribution made. But these values here are actually the numbers in the middle of these limits. It's actually the number in the middle between 6 and 88. So what I do is I call this the midpoints. MIDPT is fine for like an abbreviation. But this is literally the average of these two numbers. So you can do it one of two ways. You can put a parentheses and literally do a mathematical average, add the two, and divide by 2. That's the average. But you can also use the average command. So equals, start typing the word average. There it pops up. And then just slide across the average of these two numbers. I click there and just slid across. Or you can click there, comma, click there. But either way, there's my average. And then I just drag down. And there are my midpoints all the way across this thing. Okay, now I want to replace 88, 171, 254. I want to replace these numbers in the bin with the midpoints. So this is a more accurate portrayal of the number line that we're working on. So I'm going to replace the bin with the midpoints all the way down, and notice as I do this it updates them on the number line. Alright, it doesn't change the frequencies, it just changes the look of the histogram. Okay, so there's what we made last night. I showed you that you can change these colors. Double click it, I can change this to be a different color if I wanted to, like if I did solid fill. Right now it's that blue default color. I can make it, one of them yellow. I can make the next one red if I wanted to. I can change the colors of all these if I want to, but I'm not, I talked about last night, I'm not concerned at all with how pretty they are. I'm concerned with, is it accurate? So when you're doing your lab for this week that you're going to turn in, what I'm going to be looking at is this is, this the right number? Is this the right number? Given this, because you get to pick this, you can make it 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever you want to. Given your min and your max and the numbers of classes that you picked, was your class width correct? And then given that you got your class width, you rounded up correctly, and you started with your minimum, are all these correct? And then given this, is this correct? And if that's correct, are all these correct? And if they're all correct, is your frequency distribution correct? Okay, so I'm going to grade all of that based on if you made an error, like for instance, if you rounded down here instead of rounded up. Notice the big problem is we don't get to our final value. We don't get to the 500, so that's a problem. But if you did everything correctly, then your labs are, it doesn't matter to me what this looks like. All right, if I wanted to, like for your project though, we would want to change some of these. So if I wanted to, this is called bin because that's what the label is here. This is called frequency because that's what the label is here. That's fine for that to be frequency. If you want to change these, you just click in there, and you could say this is miles per week, because that's what it was in our actual data set. and you could call this, instead of histogram, you could say it's miles driven per week. You know, just give it a name that's more informative than just histogram. You know, so there were around 4 people who drive somewhere around 47 miles per week. Now that's not, you know, that's a big gap, 6 to 88, but 47 is our representative value for that. So there are 4 people that drove, you know, kind of, it's not exactly an average, but we'll talk about in chapter 3 that it's what we use to kind of represent the average for this value, for this group. So these numbers are kind of like, on average, around 47 miles per week, we had 4 people that were in that ballpark. We had around 130, we had another 4 people in that ballpark. So this is what we're talking about, a ballpark. Close that off of there. And this is the number that represents somewhere around these values. Okay, so that's the kind of the idea of the histogram. But what we mentioned at the end of class last time is we use the histogram to kind of give us an idea of the shape of how data is distributed. So a big bulk of our class is driving, you know, less than 300 miles ish, 337 in this case, a week, and just a few are driving more than that. So this is definitely a skewed right data set. All right, I just want you to see that when I'm doing this type of stuff, I can change the number of classes. So I changed it to 7. The class width is now 71. We haven't gotten there yet because we need one more class. All right, and oh, sorry, I'm adding 83. This is equals E2 plus the class. So I'm gonna lock it in this time to anyway. So this is already C4. So there's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 classes now. Midpoints, I'd still go all the way down with my midpoints, but now this hasn't updated. I would have to throw this away if I wanted to make a new one. I'm going to keep that one. There's my old one with 6 classes, and I'm going to do another one just so you can see it. I'm going to do data analysis, histogram again. This is my range. My bin range this time is all the way down to that 514, and my output range, I want to put it down here, like below my other histogram. So I can make more than one on a page, and we can see this time there's an empty class. All right, it has a little bit of different look to it. I can make these things go down to virtually nothing. I'm going to make it 2% again. And so there's a histogram with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 classes. All right, and I could make 8 classes. You know, I could do what I wanted to just to kind of see how the data is distributed. But again, we have this kind of climbs to a peak, and then there's these extras out here that are kind of skewing the data. So we have data that's definitely skewed to the right, with a big bulk of it being on the left hand side. All right, we didn't talk about this much in class, but if I wanted to I'm going to move this over here. If I wanted to create a relative frequency distribution from a frequency distribution, remember relative frequency is, we don't need that. Relative frequency is the frequency divided by the total, and the total is just the sum, and you can type in SUM for sum, of the frequencies. So this is our 20 students that were in class last night. All right, let me make these a little bigger so you can see them. Okay, and our relative frequency equals frequency divided by total. All right, this, I'm going to drag this down, and I want the D's 14. I want these to drag down, but I don't want this to change because it's always the total. So I'm going to lock that in again. Put write the dollar signs around it if you don't have an F4 key. And then I can drag down. Alright, so there's my relative frequencies. If I wanted them to be percents, I could do equals that divided by that times 100. Alright, and then those are percentages. Alright, if I wanted to do cumulative frequency, so I'm going to call this the cumulative frequency column. Cumulative frequency is equal to the sum of, we start with this, alright, I'll lock it in, 2, I'm going to do a colon, 2, I'm going to click here, and now I'm going to not lock it in. So it's going to start with this, and when I scroll down, this one's not going to change, but this one is. So I hit enter, and I scroll down just so you can see it. Now it's adding 4 plus 3. Alright, when I scroll down, it's adding 4 plus 3 plus 4. Okay. And if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's the 20 that we said. This will always match up with that number. Now when you see these little green things in there, it's saying that if it omits adjacent cells, just don't worry about it. It's fine. And you can, I'm clicking on ignore, but you can also ignore it by just leaving the little green diamonds in the corner. It's not a big deal, because that is how cumulative frequency is going to work. It's saying, hey, you skipped this column. You didn't do anything with this column. Well, it's because the stuff I'm doing is based on this column. All right, so that's relative frequency, cumulative frequency. Remember, we're adding these up as we go down, and we're putting it beside the sum of these numbers right there, the sum of these numbers right there, and so on. All right, since we did in class, let's do cumulative relative frequency, which is the sum of the relative frequency columns out to the side over here. So if I'm going to do cumulative relative frequency, remember that's the same thing as the idea of cumulative frequency. It's just a different column. So sum, we're going to start with relative frequency, the very first one. I'm going to lock it in F4. A colon, so we can, so sum, I'm going to click this. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm hitting 4. That's what I'm not hitting F4, I'm hitting 4. So that F4, lock it in. And then F4, and then colon. Why is it not? Let me do that. All right, I'm going to do dollar signs around this. I want to lock it in. Alright, and then I'll drag down. So the first one locks in, the second one doesn't, so it allows me to add. So 20 and 15 is 35%. And then I got 20 more. Alright, and if I drag all the way down, I'll get to 100%. Okay, so cumulative relative frequency, and again, if that were not multiplied by 100, if it was decimals, and I did that all the way down, then this would add to 1 instead of 100. So anyway, just know that when we were doing these cumulative frequencies and relative frequencies, they are the sum of these other tables up to that point in the table. And that's how we get Excel to do it. Alright guys, email me if you have any questions about this.